Hello, friends, and welcome to the Renegade Society radio show. This is where we get to know the movers and shakers in the geek and gaming industry. I'm your host, Ruel Gabiola. You may have seen me before here on Renegade. I'm one of the regular players, and I'm also the host of Tabletop Tonight on my Twitch channel, where I play games with my family almost every night of the week. Before we get started here, just a couple of reminders that if you have any questions for the designers, Ed Marriott or Adam Buckingham, feel free to drop them in chat and we'll get to those at the end of the interview. Also, a few more reminders. We have the Vampire the Masquerade Rivals ECG late pledges. They are now open, so please get in there before it's too late. We also have a couple of great shows here on Renegade on Twitch, and you can watch them on demand over on YouTube as well. We have Vampire Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, and also Wardlings on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. And that one I'm really enjoying. I'm part of the Thursday show, hanging out with friends doing the tabletop role-playing game there. It's really fun, so please come join us there. Over here on Renegade Society Radio, we also do a giveaway every show. So stay tuned for the special code word and entry form, and you'll fill that out to enter, and you could win your very own all-in pledge for Embarcadero, which is launching on Kickstarter next week. So be sure to stick around. I'm not going to say the word now. I'm going to make you wait a little bit. So hang tight, and you'll be entered to win that contest. So, without further ado, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome our guests today, Ed Marriott and Adam Buckingham, designers of Embarcadero. Ed, Adam, how are you? Welcome.
Doing great. Thanks so much for having us on. This is fun time.
Thanks, Ruel.
Right.
Doing great.
All right. Awesome. You know what? Let's just jump right into it. Can you guys tell us a bit about yourselves? What got you into designing games, and what were the games that made you want to design games?
Sure, I could go first. I got into a great gaming group with friends here in my local town, and I realized that I really liked playing Euro games. And the ones that kind of got me started are some of the typical ones: Settlers of Catan, Ticket to Ride, and then even Power Grid. And then one of my more favorite ones that got me going on early was Stone Age, because I think the worker placement works really well. And they have a mechanic in the game with those cards where everybody gets something. And I love that part of Euro style games. And I played a ton of games, hung out with my friends, enjoyed craft beer, and eventually got to the point where it's like, man, I think I could make a game. So I'm going to give it a try. And that's kind of how I got started. That was about 10 years ago.
Nice. Now, your version of Stone Age, Ed, did you have the Stinky Cup version?
Yes,
or
absolutely. It's not a legit copy unless you have the Stinky Cup. And you have to make people smell it.
I've heard so many rumors about it. I have the non-Stinky Cup version, but yeah, I've always been curious about it. I'm not curious enough to seek it out, but I've always been curious.
I could mail it to you.
I'll take your word for it, my friend. But thank you. What about you, Adam? What got you into designing games?
Yeah, so I played a lot of Magic in high school, and kind of spent all of my spare money on that all the way through high school, and then kind of fell away from that until after college when I joined the same group as Ed. And so kind of a similar trajectory from there. So Ticket to Ride was a big one for me. That was kind of the first one that I played that was kind of in the hobby game world after getting out of college. But then like Settlers of Catan and some of those other great games of the time. What really kind of broke through for me was like playing Seven Wonders, where you had this kind of new mechanic, like when you're drafting cards and you're playing these cards out and you're seeing how you can build your tableau over time, and just that feeling like I'm accomplishing something during a game was something really new to me that kind of made me think, man, this would be really cool to do this.
Nice.
And I started playing playtesting with Ed and with a few other local designers. And as I'm doing that, I'm kind of saying, wow, I think I could do this too. And so kind of started from there, and the rest is history.
Nice. It's interesting. I hear so many people talk about how, they're into Magic in high school, like so many gamers and so many game designers. Have you gone back to Magic, Adam? Nowadays, you have the online implementations and so forth.
I've played the app a little bit. So my budget now that I have a family, doesn't allow me to really get into playing with the cards, but I have played the app version, and I've had a lot of fun with that. Actually, it was cool because it had been so long since I had played. Being able to go back and see how it's changed and see all the new mechanics that are in it, and
nice.
Still a ton of fun. I still love it.
Right on. Can you guys tell us about your early attempts at game design? What did you learn from those early attempts?
Sure. My first design, when I had that thought that said, "Hey, I think I can do this," was a game called Brewmaster, about worker placement, brewing beer. You've got all these different recipes, you get your ingredients. It's a natural theme that works well with game design. And what I remember back then was I spent way too much time doing artwork and way too little time trying to get a game on the table. That was one of my first ones. I remember Gen Con 2012. I had a game about beavers. It was called Damn It, You're Building a Dam. And I actually did end up pitching it to a publisher there. It didn't get any action, which is totally fine, but it was a fun experience kind of getting into the world of game design on the publisher side, seeing what that's all about. But Brewmaster was a pet hobby at the time, and I wish it had gone somewhere, but now there's a lot of great beer games out there. There's those little ones like Microbrew. There's heavier ones like Brew Crafters from our friends at Greater Than Games / Dice Hate Me. And then there's the upcoming Uwe Rosenberg game, Hallertau, which is a heavy worker placement beer brewing game, which I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah. You mentioned Uwe, you mentioned beer, like I'm all in, it's
Right.
like
Yes.
nice. What about you, Adam? Experiences early in game design?
Yeah, so probably the first one that I actually got to the point of playtesting with friends was called Backyard Astronaut. And it was basically there's a computer game called Kerbal Space Program where you are these little green guys that are building rockets and trying to fly into space. But the rocket parts are sort of junkyard parts. So I kind of was trying to replicate that in a board game where you had a junkyard that you could go to and pick up different parts and put them together and try to build the best rocket. Kind of a tableau tile laying sort of game. And that was a lot of fun, and play tested a few times. Actually ended up pitching it a couple of times, and it didn't go anywhere, but it was a really great experience with how to kind of hone a game and narrow it down. After that, I sort of tried to do a lot of smaller games because I was realizing that with the amount of time that I had, I wanted to try to do things that were in a smaller box. So something happened between then and Embarcadero that changed, but there's something drew me to these ideas of like a small deck of cards or a small box with a few tiles in it, and how you can make a big game out of just a few components.
Yeah, it's interesting to see some of these smaller box games where you limit yourself as far as resources, like just a deck of cards or maybe dice and a couple of things, and see how far you can push yourself as a designer, right? Adam, as far as that earlier attempt, that first game you were mentioning about the building tableau, was that directly influenced from by Seven Wonders?
There were elements of it for sure. So a lot of the parts that were in the game kind of worked similar to the way you scored some of the Seven Wonders. It was a little bit like if you had Seven Wonders, but you had a little bit more of a spatial element to it.
Okay.
And the draft was in a different mechanic where you had a junkyard, so you could kind of pick up the things that were on the top of the junkyard, but there were other tiles available that were buried underneath that you could get to, but you had to spend some resources to dig down into the pile to get some of those
interesting.
earlier on in the game. So it was kind of a balance of figuring out when you want to actually spend some resources to pick up something that you might lose in a later round. So
right. Yeah. Well, as long as there wasn't any science scoring, then I'd be okay with it. I could never figure out the science scored in Seven Wonders.
I always chase it and then I lose because I'm ignoring everything else.
Exactly. Same here. Now, thinking back to those earlier designs, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice as a designer, what advice would you give yourself, Ed?
Yeah, the biggest thing is literally just get the game to the table. I learn so much more putting the first prototype on the table than I do in the hours spent trying to design it up front. That's honestly the best advice I can give to any designers who are starting out right now. Just try to get something to the table. When you play it, you will learn what's wrong with it. When you write down the design on your own, on the side, trying to make it work, of course it feels perfect. Everything is like great. You get this great idea and you've spent hours and days and weeks putting it all together. And then all of a sudden you finally make your prototype and you're like, rule number one, that one doesn't work. And so that whole time that you could have instead test the first mechanic of the game, test the core, the very simple thing. Get it to the table, have your friends play test it and see what works. When you got something that works, then start expanding it out to make all the other intricacies follow along.
I was just, it's interesting. I was just, I follow Eric Lang on Twitter, and he had just tweeted out something this morning about how, as a game designer, he just wants to put something out, like you were saying, Ed, just out on the table. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, literally just like a card with, handwritten notes on it, so he can test it right away. So, so that would be your advice to your younger self or your younger design
absolutely.
self. Nice. Awesome. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, so I would say be patient. Game design is a long process, and making a really good game takes a lot of time. And sometimes you might feel like you're losing steam on a project, and sometimes you just need to put it aside for a little bit, work on something else, and come back to it. And I found a lot of times that you get a little bit of inspiration from playing other games or from playing your own games, that you decide, oh, I really like this mechanic that I came up with for this other game, but it fits really well with this game that I put on the shelf for a little bit. And don't expect that the first time you design a game it's going to be perfect and ready to go, and that you'll even be able to solve all your problems quickly. So just kind of waiting it out, being patient, giving yourself some time to think and test and iterate, and not putting yourself in any kind of artificial timeline.
Right. And then on that note, do either of you find yourself going back to old designs and sort of stripping out the pieces from those and bring them to your your current designs?
Yes. So, going back to the Backyard Astronaut one that I had talked about, that game became 5 or 6 different designs over time. So, it started out as a rocket game, and then I kind of borrowed some mechanics for a game where you were building like a little civilization, and it was a similar sort of game. A lot of the mechanics were the same, but a different theme and a few different things. So it happens all the time that you have these little pieces and elements of a game that you say, you know what, I like this, and it's just not working in this game, but I'm going to remember this because it's going to work in another game at some point.
Got a closet full of prototypes that had been played and adjusted, played again, and then shelved. And they're sitting there. There's some good ideas in them. And it's just a matter of, one, do I have the time to get back to it? And two, is it going to be fun to work on? As a hobby game designer, I'm in it because I really love games and I love the social aspect. Not that there's much of that right now, unless you're online. But being able to come up with fun ideas and try to do something unique and different keeps bringing me back to some of the games that I've designed before. I've demoed games at Gen Con after hours in the unpublished area with people at 3 a.m. And I'll tell you, that's a really fun experience if you can find some coffee somewhere. But those games are still sitting on my shelf, and there's still something I'd like to work on. So another piece of advice is, just because you don't think a game is fun to work on anymore, don't throw it away. Just put it on your shelf for a while and see if there's inspiration later on down the road.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, we are in different times, obviously these days, and we can't just, meet up at a play group or, a game night to test games. Are either of you or both of you using Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia to demo games and play test your designs?
I haven't gotten that far. I have been very focused on Embarcadero this year, just because Adam and I have had the privilege of kind of being involved as designers, even on some of the artwork side of things, which has been an awesome part of working with Renegade. So I haven't been actively working on other stuff right now. But I wouldn't be opposed to it. I like doing that sort of stuff, and putting the sandbox together on Tabletopia would be a kind of fun experience, I think, learning how all that works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same for me. So like Ed said, it's actually been kind of a bit of a blessing in disguise that we haven't been able to do a lot of in-person playing, because there's been so much things that we're working on for Embarcadero. The whole development process of that has been really involved, and we've actually had a little bit more time to work on some of that because we haven't been able to get in person with our friends. So I'd rather be playing with my friends, but having a little bit of extra time has really been helpful with some of the development on this.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And so, speaking of, what is it like to collaboratively to collaborate and design a game together? And what did you learn from each other while you're designing Embarcadero?
Adam, why don't you go first?
Sure. So as we both sort of talked about, Ed and I have been friends for a long time. We met, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe. And we live in the same town. So we kind of know each other's gaming styles and we know each other's strengths. And that's made it really good working together. So I know that my strengths are things like looking at the big picture and figuring out a big concept, but I'm not as good at actually putting mechanics to that concept. And Ed's really good at that. So working together, I can say, hey, here's a cool idea. Here's what a big theme that I want to work on. Here are a couple of mechanics maybe. And then I give it over to Ed and he says, okay, here, this is the glue that holds all those things together. We're going to hash that out. And then when it actually gets down to the nitty gritty of doing the work, Ed was talking about how he likes to make art and graphic design for things. And that is not my strong suit at all. But I'm really good at spreadsheets. So the two of us work well together because he'll be working on all of the art and the assets to make a prototype look good. And I'm working on kind of the behind the scenes spreadsheeting and the technical aspects of putting the prototype together. So I think it's worked out really well with us.
Yeah, I'd agree. I second everything he just said about the pairing that I think has allowed us to work really well together. I do enjoy putting artwork together, making prototype cards from older versions and stuff like that. And Adam's great with the spreadsheet and figuring out all the balance of the cards and everything. And I think it's worked out really well. We get together often enough anyway, pre-COVID, to do gaming. And it just kind of naturally turned into this, let's design together. And we've had some really great design sessions where, we've play tested our game. We took it to Protospiel Madison or Protospiel Milwaukee, and they gave us this feedback. So we sat down with that feedback and then took it, and the two of us together give it a different perspective than just one person designing a game. And that's so useful because, every set of eyes on a problem can provide a different solution that allows you to tweak and turn your game into something that's more and more awesome every single time. And I think that's been really beneficial, especially here with Embarcadero, because it is a heavier kind of game, and you need to figure out how to balance all those little details. And so we took early versions and have turned it into what we believe is a really great game. We're so excited about having it come out.
Nice. And so looking at the game as it exists today, how different does it look than from when you both originally conceived it?
It's mixed. So there are a few things that were there from day one that are still there now. So the kind of 3D component of how you place the ships in the harbor and how you stack the different cubes on top of it and you're building up your sort of structures like that. That's all from the very first design of the game. But we've also made a lot of changes to it as well. So there's kind of a 1.0 and a 2.0 of Embarcadero, and the 1.0 was a worker placement sort of game. And then we kind of threw that away because we decided there wasn't cool enough. And then we kind of got to close to where we are now. And there have been a lot of changes in development as well. But for the most part, the design as it looks now is very similar to how it looked when we pitched it, with some tweaks that made it even better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the theme, it was a very theme first idea. So Adam connected with me about, let's make a game out of this theme that he had learned about. And I'm like, man, that sounds awesome, especially because I had lived in San Francisco for a summer. So it was close to me. And when he told me about it, I'm like, man, that sounds like a great theme. Let's totally do it. So we came up with a design that what Adam said was, it was a worker placement design where you would get cards like this. You'd play a card on your turn and you'd get workers and you'd get resources for that round. And it was a worker placement. So if you played cards with a lot of workers, you got more actions, but you probably had fewer resources. And so there was a balance like that. And it worked. Worker placement is a pretty common mechanic at this point, and people are familiar with it. And I think Adam and I we had like a self-intervention one night where we sat down at the table and we're like, this game works. It's a fun worker placement game. And then we asked ourselves, is it awesome? And we kind of were like, it's okay. Like we like it. It works and it's fun, but it's not, we wanted to do something more. And then, so we had that intervention. We decided to kind of change the worker mechanic over to a different kind of card-based hand management thing. And we came up with crazy cards with a lot of information on them that gave you resources and an action. You can either dock it as a ship or build it as a building. And ever since that point, we realized that we had something a little bit better than our original just commonplace worker placement. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay worker placement, but we were looking for something that had new aspects to the game. And the worker placement version we had didn't have anything new. So we were looking for a little bit more.
Yeah, one of the things that we noticed was the coolest part about the game was that 3D structure thing.
Mm-hmm.
But with the worker placement version, that was kind of the 3D element was kind of secondary, because you spent your whole turn figuring out where to place your workers and gathering resources and doing other things, and you weren't putting ships in the harbor and building on them and doing cool stuff. And so we said we need to just focus this in on, let's just eliminate the stuff that's not super awesome, and find ways to focus on the elements that we think are super really original and really cool about this game.
I love that image of you two guys just getting together and say, you know what, is this really awesome? Like, are we going to go with it? Like, you're both like, man, it's okay. But so as far as the spatial element, was that always in the game and you guys just brought it out more to the forefront? Or is it something that you did the worker placement thing and said, oh, let's throw a spatial thing into it?
Yeah, the spatial thing was there from the beginning. I was looking back at our emails this week because we're getting ready for the Kickstarter, and I wanted to get some history in there. And looking back at the emails, our original email, I think it was the third or fourth email in the chain, I said, hey, I've got these cool cubes that snap together. They're like counting cubes. Wouldn't it be cool if we could have those in the game and we could build vertically on tops of these ships? And so yeah, and that was always there as a component of the game, was trying to make it kind of a spectacle on the table.
Nice. Yeah, I was wondering, like, was there any other games that you felt like influenced you as far as building? Because I don't, that when I first saw, the early thing, bits about Embarcadero, I was really excited to see all the stuff that you're building. Were there any other games that influenced you as far as that's concerned?
I didn't have any particularly. I just thought that the idea, it fit with the theme of building buildings on these ships. And I really I'm a spatial person. And so to see that visual build up as the game goes on, it just felt awesome to me. Now, I remember at the time, there was some game that had like cube Tetrisy shapes on it. I don't remember the name. I should have looked this up before tonight, but it had pieces on it that you had an opponent across from you and you both had to try to match the symbol on a card. But you only had half of the information. It was a stacking thing. And I remember that looking really cool, but I don't remember. That was maybe a little mild influence just because it had that 3D visual aspect. But otherwise, we just wanted to try to make it as thematic as possible. And it made sense to start building up as long as out on the wharves.
Right. And you'd mentioned how the theme came first, right? Embarcadero. How much research went into it? I mean, did you really dive into history books to, dig up all this information?
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, sure. That was my role in it. So yeah, I just like went head first down the rabbit hole, learning about the early days of San Francisco. I heard about it originally on a podcast on 99% Invisible. They were doing an episode on cities that grew out into the water and filled in land where there once was water. And the first story they told was about San Francisco and how they had built on top of these ships. I'm like, well, that's really cool. I need to learn more about that. So I started reading articles. I started looking up, there were lists of ships that were actually sunk at the time. So they had a registry of all these ship names of ships that are currently underneath San Francisco. So we actually pulled that list and we included those ships in the game. So all the ships in the game are actual ships that are underneath San Francisco. And, just learning about that. And, Ed lived in San Francisco for a while. I've actually never been to San Francisco. So for me, it was a really interesting exposure to the city that I knew a little bit about, but I didn't know the history of it. And it was, digging into that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Nice. So fascinating. Before I forget, friends, we are going to be doing a giveaway. So everyone in chat, if you're watching now, we're going to give you the secret word, the code word for your entry into the contest to win an all-in pledge for Embarcadero. The code word is WARF. WHARF, Wharf, right? Pretty on brand, right? So that's the code word, Wharf. Desiree's going to drop the link in chat. Thank you, Desiree. And y'all will be entered into contest to win your very own copy. So drop that in there, Wharf, WHARF. And I'm here with Ed Marriott and Adam Buckingham. Thank you, friends, for hanging out with us today. We're talking about their game that's going to be going on Kickstarter real soon here, thanks to Renegade Game Studios and Embarcadero. Let's continue. So talking about the game, back to the game, what are your favorite parts of the game that have stayed? And what are the things that are in the game now that you're happy to see that have been added during the process of development?
One of my favorite things, of course, is the building aspect, which we've already talked on, but I'd like to also say the multi-use cards. So when we switched and we had that kind of self-intervention, we realized that switching to that sort of thing could be really cool. And so we came up with this idea that every card could serve 3 actions. It's a little different now in the final version, thanks to the developer. But at the time we came up with this idea, you could either dock it as a ship and get its resources, or you could build it as a building, or you could discard it. That core mechanic has stayed the same since we were working on this back in 2016. But it's a little bit different now that the ship cards and the building cards are actually split apart. So I remember hearing a story when we had sent the prototype over to Renegade that they showed a copy of one of the cards. Here's an example. It's going to be tough to see, but this is the little prototype card guide I had made for our prototype version. And it's very busy. Like, there was a lot going on these cards. And I think one of the best things that's gone through development was to actually split that apart to make the decision space a little bit smaller. As a designer, one of the things I like to talk about is the decision space that people have available. Like in Ticket to Ride on your turn, you only have really 3 choices. You're either taking cards, taking destination tickets, or playing a route, right? And so taking it in this card, there was so much on one thing that splitting it apart ended up making a lot of sense. And so we had that in the beginning, it got split apart, but it's fundamentally still there in the final version. And I love that.
So basically it's a little more streamlined at this point.
Yes, absolutely.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah,
Adam?
So one of the elements that this was pretty early on in the design that we added this. We were kind of realizing that the game could start to feel a little bit like a multiplayer solitaire. And so we added this mechanic of the city council track. And so there's a track on the board, and you can move up on that when you put your structures next to another player's structures. So instead of sitting off in your little corner and doing all the things you want to do in your corner, it encourages you to try to be close to other players. And that's something that's kind of stuck with the game, and that's still in there. And, it feels like a lot of times with these heavy Euros, you can end up getting into your own game and not paying any attention to what anybody else is doing. And you kind of do that to your detriment in Embarcadero. You can still totally go off on your own and play your own game and try to avoid the other players. But there's this one element of the city council, and there's a lot of points and a lot of bonuses to be gained in the city council that if you ignore it, you're probably not going to do as well as you could have if you would have started thinking about, well, you know what, I could put this ship next to that other guy's ship and start getting some city council points as well.
Right.
And so I really kind of enjoy how we were able to take the heavy Euro game that may not have a ton of interaction and add a little bit of extra interaction without really, feeling like you're being combative with other players. It's a bonus for you, but it doesn't necessarily hurt the other players. So, it feels like a good positive interaction between players.
Yeah, I always appreciate that in game designs. I like that where, it's a different type of player interaction. I guess it's more indirect rather than just totally confrontational. When you decided to do that, were you looking strictly for a mechanism to increase the player interaction, or was it like, hey, I just learned about the city council thing, how can we throw that into the game?
Yeah, no, it was more the former. So we had a track. It was originally, it doesn't make a lot of sense because they're not going to have a military in the city. When you're designing a game, you're trying to think, well, how are the different avenues that you can get to a victory, and having a few different ways to score points. And in this case, we had a track on the board that you can move down. And originally that track, the only way to move down it was to play certain types of cards, and you'd move down that track. we ended up doing playtesting. We kind of realized, hey, you know, there'd be more dynamic ways to do this. I think it was actually one of our friends that suggested that, hey, maybe if you play your structures next to another player, then you can move up on the track. And we were like, wow, that's a really good suggestion. And so we put that in the game, and the upshot of it was it made it so that there was kind of a strategic element to how you would place your structures. So if you're placing something on your ship before there's anybody else around, you need to think about where you put it, because other players are going to be able to now place next to that structure. So if you can place it in a way that nobody else can get next to it, then you're cutting off an opportunity for them to move up the console track. Or if you wait to place structures somewhere until after someone else has placed near there, then you can move up on the console track instead of them. And it just added this really cool strategic element and interactive element to the game.
Awesome. I want to circle back to the use of multi-purpose cards. So how early on in the design did that come into play? So I love multi-purpose cards. I always love having that decision, you know, that space. So you're talking about that, Ed, decision space where I can do different things with just a single card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that was pretty early on. I mean, going back to our first prototype, the core was there because this card has 3 different things on it already. It has the workers that you get, it has the resources that you get, and it has the size ship that you'd have to dock. And so from the beginning, we had that core idea of each card serving multiple purposes. And from there, it kind of expanded into the idea of now cards need to be both the option for a ship or a building, and it naturally flowed out of that into this other one that I kind of showed. I keep prototypes around that are old for some reason. It's a gift, I guess. And so it turned into this idea where you've still got the ship, it shows what size it is and what resources you get, but then here there's an action that you get from scrapping the card, just discarding it if you can't do any other action. And we wanted to make those as interesting as possible, and there's great possibilities in the game itself now. And then also the building version where it allows you to either get end game points or in-game points. And so we converted the early cards into that pretty early on, I would say. Definitely, you know, before we really got into a core design that we were comfortable pitching.
Yeah, the ship and building cards was the first thing that came out of when we had the talk and we're trying to decide where to go with the game. When we decided that we had to make the game as awesome as possible, that was kind of the first thing that came about. Was we said, you know, we have these cards, we have a player mat, you can tuck the card under the player mat and hide the top or the bottom of it, and depending on how you do it, you get a different bonus out of it. And we thought it was pretty early on. I think it was a couple months after we started doing the design.
I love the board game designer, the talk, right? Yep. To see if we can make it awesome. This is the question that I'm sure everyone's wondering about. If you two were to play Embarcadero today against each other, who would win and why?
I saw this in the list of questions. I really don't want them to ask that one, because I think that ultimately Adam is more well suited to win this game against me. I am a little more flippant in my decision making sometimes, and I'm not always looking ahead to say I need this card so I can dock that card so I can build this ship so I can do a level 6 structure. And Adam definitely has more of that in his brain with his spreadsheetiness and all of that. I think that if we played 100 times, he'd probably win 70 of them. I'd feel confident.
Is that a fair answer, Adam?
I mean, I think Ed's being modest. Ed and I, we play tested it a lot together. That's one of the advantages of having a co-designer, is you have someone built in to play test with. So we actually play tested it a lot, 2 players together. And I think we were pretty close to even during that. You know, I might have won a little bit more than Ed. Ed's strength in life is that he just has a ton of fun. And we'll be playing a game and he'll be like, man, I'm having so much fun. I'm losing really bad, but I'm having so much fun doing it. And, you know, that's kind of the sign of a good game. If Ed's having fun while he's losing and not getting too frustrated with it, that means it's at least a good game. It's a fun game to lose.
Nice. And so just in the development process then, when you started, did it start as a 2-player game and then you worked your way up to 4 players, or did you think it's going to be a 4-player game, let's drill down the other way?
I always like designing for as many people as possible. So we started and just, let it be what it is, get as many components for the prototype made as possible. Try it with, two, try it with seven. Why not? See what happens and what works and what doesn't. So it was always a multiplayer game more than two from the beginning.
Awesome. Cool. And I'm going to ask the voice of the meeples, Desiree, do we have any questions from our friends in chat today?
Yes, we do.
Awesome.
So let's see. We have quite a few today.
Great.
Let me pull these up. All right. So what is one of your darling or favorite ideas that you had to cut from Embarcadero to make the game better?
Whew.
So for me, this I'll talk about during development. It's a really interesting process when you're doing development, and we're looking at it as people who have been playing this for a really long time, and then the publisher and the developer come in and they're trying to make it into a product. And the cards with the ships on the top and the buildings on the bottom, I loved that. I loved being able to have just a single deck of cards, and there's a ship and a building, and both cards do the same thing. And playing it all the time, I didn't notice that it was just information overload as much as when you look at it the first time as a new player, it's overwhelming. And so I think it made the game better by splitting them, but it was a hard thing for me to come to that point initially. I was pretty disappointed about that, but in the end, I think it was the right decision to make. And it feels really good to play it now with the separated decks, and it works really well. But it's one of those, you have a darling that you're going to come in with, and someone's going to tell you that you need to kill your darling, and
Yep.
and it's actually good to have somebody else who can make that decision for you, because you can't always let go of it, even though you know that it needs to be let go.
Yeah, it was the same one for me. I mean, we both really loved what we had, but I mean, as I showed before, this really is information overload when you've got resources on the top and the bottom, and you've got the ship size, the ship, the building, all that stuff. It really, looking back, it really was the best decision to take this game to that next level and turn it into something that is just super replayable now as well, because buildings that were originally paired to a ship are now separate. And then it just ended up working really, really well with the decision space that people can choose for their strategy in the game.
Great.
Awesome, thank you. Who much did you know? Oh, how much did you know about the history of Embarcadero before working on the game? I think we talked a little bit about that. I don't know if you had any more to say about that question.
Well, I just, having lived there, I was familiar that the Embarcadero you have now over on the east side of San Francisco is not where the shoreline was. That's pretty common in terms of understanding. What I didn't really realize was just how many ships had been sunk and buried at sea level, where, I think Adam's, the podcast he mentioned starts out by saying they were digging for a foundation on a skyscraper or something in San Francisco in the 70s or so. And when they got down so far, they hit something really hard. They didn't know what it was or why it would be there. It was the hull of a ship. And then they started researching why this existed. And, going into that history is just so fascinating. Especially for me, having lived there, not really knowing about these ghost ships of Embarcadero. It's a really cool thing. So maybe, Adam, you want to share another bit or not?
No, I think you covered it. I didn't know anything about it before we started working on the game, really. I listened to the podcast and sent it Ed an email 2 minutes later, and we started working on the game. So.
And I think that's one thing I got really excited about. It's like this piece of San Francisco history, I had no idea about it until I was looking at the rule book, and I was like, oh wow, this is crazy that there were like these ships that were just sunk here. I was like, I've been to San Francisco a few times and I had never heard anything about it.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Desiree?
Yes, we do.
Awesome.
So let's see. How are you playtesting during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's funny.
I'm not.
Yeah. Solo. I've been doing a lot of solo stuff. So I'm working on a few little pet projects right now just for fun. For some reason, when I don't have to drive in and out of work every day, I find myself with a little bit of extra time every day. And so that's allowed me to do a little bit here and there when I'm not doing, Embarcadero stuff. And so I have some pet projects, but honestly, it's all just conceptual, trying to put together interesting mechanics and figure out what a prototype might look like. And just hoping that someday I can get together with my gaming group in person and put a prototype in front of them. It's just kind of a bummer time to be doing game design like that, because games, video games would be fine, right? But board games are such a social thing that it's almost sometimes more about just being with the people rather than the game you're playing. And so that's been a bit of a bummer for me.
Yeah, it's actually changed a little bit the way I'm thinking about game design, because I'm thinking right now, if I want to make a prototype, I'm going to have a hard time getting anybody to test it with me. So I've been trying to think more about like, oh, could I do something that is cooperative, or could I do something that is primarily a solo game? And rather than trying to play test it by myself, a multiplayer game by myself, pretending that I'm different people, find ways to say, well, what if we're just a bunch of people that are working together, and then I can test that a little bit by myself as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like that now with the COVID and everything, perhaps games with like open information are going to be like those are the games that people are developing right now, because you can play it online or whatever. Solo games as well too.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to do that I think has been a little bit more enabled during this weird time is roll and write games. You've seen them for a few years now.
Yep.
And fundamentally, if you've got a roll and write game, all you've got to do is hand somebody their little sheet. They can bring their own writing utensil if they want, and just have one person do the dice rolling. And that sort of thing does work in a global pandemic time like this. So those types of games, I think, are something that I've been wanting to do a little bit, just because I have a few and they're fun. And also because I know people could still be playing them at a time like this.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Like, I get together with my family once every couple of weeks, and we'll just play something on Zoom or Skype, and it's always a roll and write, because we can't, everyone's got their score sheet, or you can download one and one person rolls the dice and we all play along.
Yeah, we had neighbors, I probably shouldn't say this, but we had neighbors do a laminated copy of Welcome To. And we play over Zoom with them, where they're just flipping the cards. They've got a camera on the cards, and it worked. It was a lot of fun.
Yep.
It's not always the same experience, though, when you're not with the people in the room, but
Agreed.
It worked.
Yep. Cool.
Awesome. How much do you rely so when you were playtesting, how much do you rely on playtesters' opinion versus what you can tell from watching them play?
Do you want to start, Adam?
Yeah. For me, I probably rely more on watching. I listen to what they have to say. I think a lot of it comes down to asking the right questions of them. So it's, what did you do that made you feel really cool during the game? What do you wish you could have done that you couldn't do in the game? What did you feel like was maybe not a fun thing to do, or was maybe too powerful, or whatever? Asking some leading questions rather than just saying, what did you think? Or tell me what you liked. Trying to direct them towards specific avenues. But for the most part, it is a lot of like watching how they're playing, watching what people are doing, what actions are they not taking, what is everybody ignoring, what strategies are the winners taking, is there a dominant strategy that's always seems to win, things like that. Yeah, and I do a lot of data analysis on playtesting as well, so I try to collect as much information as I can about the game after the playtest. So seeing which cards did people play, what types were they, which resources did they all have, and more than just what the final score was, so that I can go back later and play with my spreadsheets and do some balancing that way.
Nice.
Yeah, there's kind of two things for me for that question. One is, I always like, when I'm playtesting or I'm going to a proto-spiel type event, I like to bring a feedback form. And because it's a playtest, people know that I want feedback on it. So I'm giving them a little sheet to help them, answer, was it fun? What did you like? What did you dislike? How could it be better? What really stunk? Those sorts of things that they have to fill out, because then I save all those and I can always go back to that and see, oh yeah, in March of 2018, this group of playtesters really loved this certain aspect. And then the other thing is, I like to use the visual watching people play as a diagnostic. At the general level, are they even having fun? Are they losing attention? Are they turning away and having side conversations? Or are they really engaged, and are they plotting and planning? It gives me a really good idea of their actual interest in the game. And I think that that's a good tool that designers can be using, is look at the body language and follow up with what people are doing and ask those questions, like Adam's questions. Those are great questions. I love those questions. Ask them, and then try to get a sense of how much people enjoy it. I mean, if you've got a game and people are just having side conversations the whole time, maybe that's one of those that you should just put on a shelf. If you've got one where you can tell they're in their decision bubble trying to choose what to do, maybe that's one you should keep working on. Those are the types of things I like to tell game designers, to help you decide whether you should keep going or not, because a lot of time it's easy to fall in love with an idea. And it like the darling thing. If you've got something that you just love because you think it's great, but the playtesters aren't giving you that same feedback, you just kind of got to open your eyes and say, okay, you know what? I really like it, but I'm going to shelve it for now, and I'll work on something else based on what these playtesters are telling me. That's hard to do. It's hard to do.
To build on that, I think so we do a lot of playtesting with our game group and our friends. And I think one of the keys with that is to make sure that the friends that are playtesting for you are the types of friends that can be brutally honest with you. And we have some really great friends who have no illusions about whether we're going to still be their friends after the end of the night. The friendship is not in question, so they can just tear our games apart. They can tell us what was awful, what was really good. And so I really like playtesting with some honest people who are not worried about hurting our feelings. Because we've gotten a lot out of those playtests, more than you get out of a playtest with friends who want to compliment you and make you feel good about it. We're not looking for encouragement when we're playtesting. We're looking for critical feedback. We want to know what's good, but we really want to know what's bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome. What games are your biggest influences?
Games like this and this and this and this and this. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge fan of Euro style games where you can collect a lot of points throughout the game, trying to figure out which strategies work really well. One game in particular that I'm a huge fan of is Five Tribes. I love it. At the start of the game, it's a bit of that information overload, right? Because you've got so many meeples on all the different tiles. But as you're playing the game, you get into these grooves of, well, I'm going to do the market buildings and I'm going to try to collect all the cards. And a few turns into the game, you've made certain choices and you've developed your strategy. And it's kind of the same thing with Embarcadero, where I've got a size 6 card from the deal that I really want to do, but I want to do it at a high level building. So I'm going to hold on to it for the first 2 rounds and try to set myself up with it for the third. And games like that, where you can have a strategy develop in the first couple turns that you can then steer the rest of your game to, I love that. I eat it up. It's great.
Yeah, I love games that have a really simple core, but have a lot of depth below it. So we talked about Seven Wonders earlier. It's really simple to teach somebody how to play Seven Wonders. It takes a few times playing it to realize all of the strategy that's going on underneath. I look at a game like Concordia. That's another one. Super simple core.
Yep.
You've got a hand of cards and you can play them in whatever order you want. You can choose when you want to pick them up. But there's a lot more going on. And if you just have fun playing the cards, you're probably going to lose because you're not paying attention to the scoring, or you're not paying attention to this or that. So I really like the ones that you read the rule book and you say, oh, is that all? That's all the rules? And then you realize, oh, there's a lot to this game. It's more complicated than what the rules say.
I love games like that where there's low rules overhead, but then there's a ton of strategic depth. And I was just thinking about Concordia. I never win at that game because I'm having too much fun playing the cards. So
right.
Obviously, I know what I'm doing wrong now.
Yeah, I sit there with after I pick them all up, I sit there and I'm putting them in order. I'm like, I'm going to play this one, and then I'm going to play this one, and then I'm going to play this one. And then I'm realizing, wait a second, I'm not picking up any scoring cards. I'm not
exactly.
I'm neglecting this thing.
Totally.
All right. So what I'm hearing is have less fun when you're playing.
There's a lesson learned right there, friends.
So let's see. Do you have a particular developer that you like to work with?
Well, I have a really good friend in our gaming group, Adam, as well. I like getting his development advice. And in the past, where we've designed stuff, he's been a great person to get their eyes on our games because he definitely feels more of a developer role than a designer role. And it's been awesome to have him on board to tell us, what if you did this or don't do that? Or if you tweaked this bit, it's really going to make the game more fun. And he's got a great handle on uh, what makes things fun and unique. And so it's been great to work with him. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to TC Petty for his development on Embarcadero. TC and I, we've known each other for a long time. And when I found out we would get to work with TC Petty on this project, it was great news. I was really excited about it. TC is pretty awesome. Going back to Viva Java, which I've got Viva Java dice over here. It was a great experience. So thank you, TC Petty, for your work on this project as well.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add to what Ed said. I mean, to his point about TC, I think we were both pretty excited when we heard that he would be doing the development on this project because we both have loved his games, and his style of game that he's designed is a really good fit with the style of game that we were going for with Embarcadero. Kind of the headspace that goes on in TC's games is very similar to what we're going on with here. And it was sort of remarkable watching him work because he would play through it a few times and he would come with these really great suggestions of, here's a problem. And we may have seen the problem before and never found a good solution for it. And he has a good solution for it because it's a different perspective. And it's someone who's designed similar games to this one coming in with his experience. And it was really a great experience working with him.
Cool.
Great. Sorry, did you have
any other questions, Desiree?
Yes, we do have a few more.
Oh, cool.
How do you balance playing games for fun and designing, and for fun and designing or playtesting?
That's a good question. I've mentioned before that we have a lot of friends who are willing to playtest our games, and we need to kind of be conscious of how often we're asking them to playtest, because sometimes they might want to play actually ready games that are not in development. So there is a balance to that. Our friends are very gracious in playing our games, no matter how rough they are. But at the same time, realizing that once in a while we just need to sit down and have fun and not be a designer for a night. So I would say we probably do more of the playing for fun than we do the playtesting. And often we'll say, let's get together, we'll play test, and then we'll play something for fun afterwards, just to make sure that it's not all just about work and play testing and being a game designer.
Yeah, I'd like to add that the other big benefit of co-designing is that there's somebody who's willing to play test it all the time. And so even if there's nights where it's just Adam and I getting together to get in a couple play tests, those nights are so valuable. And then you don't always have that feeling of feeling bad asking your friends to play test and, not play a real game at this point. But that's a huge benefit of co-designing. It's been great.
Great. And then what is your favorite game to play that you typically lose at?
Oh, man. I don't think I've ever won King Domino, but I have a ton of fun playing it. I don't know. I don't know why. There's something about it that I just can't. I can't win it, but it's a ton of fun. I love the decisions I'm making and having fun doing it. And then I get to the end and I don't realize why I just got blown out of the water by everybody else.
For me, it's got to be Scythe by Stonemaier Games. I love it. I love the decisions. I love the limited decisions. You only got those 3 because you have to move your pawn. It's great. The game itself is a lot of fun. You're trying to get stars in all these different categories. And then at some point after round 1 or 2, I'm just playing and I forgot how to win. And so I never end up winning. I think I've probably played either the base game or the legacy version like 20 times. I've probably won once. It's a brutal track record.
But you had fun with it, right?
Tons of fun. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great game.
We have awesome. A joke. We have a joke in our play group that I win games the first time that I'm playing it and never again. And that's generally true. So I win the game a lot of times the first time I'm playing it. And then for whatever reason, the next time I play it, I think it's because I try saying, well, what if I try a different strategy than I did last time? But it turns out the strategy I did last time was much better than every other strategy that I try.
It's uncanny how often he wins on the first play. The first time you're playing a game, he wins. It's like, let's get this one out of the way, and then let's go play it again.
Nice.
All right, so we have one more question that I see from Chris. I believe that he play tested, or he was able to demo or something, or he found out about the game for Gen Con, I believe. But with Levi Strauss being in the game, will there be a pair of jeans add-on in the Kickstarter? Always enjoy a comfortable pair when playing a game.
Yeah, it's actually it's in the box. Yeah, it's a really big box. Well, just make sure when you fill out the survey that you give your size, and your cut preference would be good too.
There you go.
We should have considered a denim box for the game.
Oh, a denim sleeve.
Yeah. And then like the box sleeve would have a pocket where you could put the components and stuff.
We might be better off trying to figure out a way to get some Ghirardelli products into the game. So.
Oh, okay. There it is right there. Oh, that's funny. All right. So that's it for questions. Awesome. Cool. Ed, Adam, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We really appreciate it. I'm going to wish you much success with Embarcadero, which releases soon on Kickstarter. Before we get going, where can people get in touch with you online?
So I am available on Twitter at Ed P. Marriott or Instagram at Boards and Barley. And also I have a blog that is pretty sparse this lately time, but it is also called boardsandbarley.com. You can check me out there. Always happy to add articles if people have feedback.
Yep. And I'm on Twitter at Adam Buckingham, and that's probably about the only place you'll find me.
Cool. Awesome. So thanks again, gentlemen, for joining me today. And I want to remind everyone in chat that type in that word, WHARF, on the entry form. There's a link in chat. Type in WARF. You're going to be entered to win your very own copy of the All-In Pledge of Embarcadero. A couple other reminders before we get out of here. Vampire the Masquerade rivals the ECG. Late pledges are open. Get in on it, folks. The Kickstarter for Embarcadero starts September 15th. We're right around the corner. When is that? Is that next? That's next week, folks. Yep. We also have Vampire Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific here on Renegade's Twitch channel, and also Wardlings, the RPG campaign. We continue that Thursdays at 1 p.m. So that's it, folks. Thank you again. I want to thank Ed and Adam and Desiree as well. And until next time, Renegades, remember to play your game. Bye, everybody.
See you guys.